It's been said that every quilt tells a story, and it's so true. But I also believe every quilter has a story to tell. I wanted to hear about the people behind these wonderful quilts and thought you'd enjoy hearing about their lives also. Welcome to A Quilter's Life. I knew when Mel Beach shared that at a young age she had memorized who the artist was of each sculpture in the museum near her, that she was going to be sharing some brilliant information with us, and I wasn't disappointed. We can easily see how her life experiences molded her into an inspiring quilt teacher. I love the quote she gave from her coach, "If you had fun, you won." Again, my thanks to Carolina Moore for encouraging Mel to be interviewed. Mel, thanks so much for joining us on A Quilter's Life.
Thanks, Paula. I'm delighted to be here with you and chatting and sharing my journey.
I'm so excited to hear all about it. How did you find out about A Quilter's Life?
As a quilting professional, I often attend networking events, especially via Zoom. We tend to have kind of lonely lives, and so these networking opportunities are great for connecting and sharing our journey. And one of those is hosted by Carolina Moore, who is one of your previous guests. And several other past guests were raving about what a wonderful podcast, how friendly and a welcoming of a host you are. So I was like, I got to check this out. And so I did. So thank you for taking me up on the invitation.
Well, thank you for signing up. Obviously, it is so much fun to talk to quilters, isn't it?
Absolutely.
And if I ever have a headache or something and I get to do one of these interviews, I'm just suddenly, the headache's gone.
It's magic. I love it.
Please share where you were born and raised.
Sure. I actually grew up in upstate New York. I say upstate because there's more than just New York City. I was about maybe 90 minutes north of New York City, so close enough that we could go in for field trips and whatnot. But it was a pretty rural community. Large dairy farms were quite common in our community, fairly small school size. But it was really wonderful growing up wise. There was lots to do, a lot of outdoor things. So I really enjoyed that. I loved taking any and all art classes in elementary and high school. If it was offered, I took it. And so we were not too far away from Storm King Art Center. It's an outdoor sculpture museum. And at one point when I was probably fourth or fifth grade, if you showed me any sculpture in that museum, I would know the artist or I had a pretty good guess. I was just infatuated with this museum. It was wonderful and a beautiful landscape with natural environment, the mountains. That was kind of a fun memory. Anything creative, I was always crafting. I had a little craft stash in my room. I did a lot with Girl Scouts. I think that was a really wonderful kind of potpourri of all kinds of activities that you could get involved with. I also did 4-H, several different 4-H programs where we did quite a bit of crafts. I think that's what I was often drawn to. And the last activity I did often was Odyssey of the Mind. I don't know if you're familiar with Odyssey of the Mind. I think it's an elementary and high school and maybe even college program, but it's all about creativity. And so teams are formed and they do creative-based challenges. And some of it's long form and some of it's short form, thinking on your feet. And it was a really fun activity. It was a great opportunity to connect with other students, but really kind of stretch my creative skills.
Wow. With growing up with that, it sounds like you have such a wonderful base to draw from.
I think so. And actually, I left out part of why I was so active is my family voted to disconnect cable TV when we were young. And so because we weren't sitting in front of the TV all the time, we got out. We did a lot of games as a family. We put together lots of puzzles. Sometimes when my mother probably, go outside, go play, we had lots to do. And so I think that was a really wonderful childhood bringing up. And I often reflect on that as I'm creating art, making quilts, etc.
I'm curious, did you also see your mother and or father doing any type of crafts?
I think it skips generations. Both my maternal and paternal grandmothers were very involved with the needle arts. They did knitting and crochet, embroidery. So they often taught me how to do that. And I just loved playing with yarn and needle. And so I think I learned it more from my grandparents than necessarily my mother and father.
So were your grandparents living near you?
My paternal grandmother. We had a little in-law cottage right behind our house. So she was there. So she taught me how to play poker when I was probably 3 or 4 years old. We played poker with Teddy Grahams and pennies. My maternal grandparents, they lived much further away, but we would usually visit them once every year, or they'd come to visit us. So not quite as often, but they weren't completely out of my life. So I was very thankful that we had those opportunities to connect.
Nice. Do you have a special memory that just stands out in your mind from you growing up?
I would say I love going to summer camp. That was my special happy place, especially Girl Scout camp. I love doing paddle sports, so canoeing. And I know every year my Girl Scout camp would host a canoe week, and there would be a big regatta with all the camps in this particular park, and we would all compete. And I just love that. In fact, one summer, my family was planning a trip to Disneyland here in California. I'd never been, and I chose to actually stay back and go to Girl Scout camp because that was the canoe week, and I would not want to miss that. And I just loved it. I did it year after year. We would do these races. Those were short ones, but then they started forming a team where we would do a longer, I think it was like 5 mile or 5K race in the fall, which was really fun at a big park where they'd have fireworks and all kinds of activities and fun. And then from that, I ended up going to work for the summer camp and other summer camps, doing lifeguarding, swim instructions, and boating instructor. So I kind of followed that into my adulthood.
Other than quilting, did you have employment?
I did. So it was a very sad day when I had to get a real job around the clock after graduating from grad school. So I could no longer go back to work for the summer camp. My training in college was in higher education. So I worked for a number of colleges and universities in an administrative capacity, specifically residential living. So I was living in the dormitories and kind of overseeing a lot of the staff, the programming that was happening. And I kept working my way up to the ranks. So I did that for a number of years, a lot of cafeteria food, a lot of midnight, late night calls when I was on call for the entire campus, because, 2,500 21-year-olds or so, what could possibly go wrong with that equation? So I got very stealthy at answering calls at all hours and actually having pretty functional conversations. I kind of impressed myself. When I moved from New York to California, there were some number of budget challenges. And so for me to get back into higher ed, it probably would have been going back several steps. And I wasn't willing to live back in a residence hall at that time in my life. So I've pursued other careers. I've worked for nonprofits like Girl Scouts. Again, my childhood kind of influencing my adulthood. I did some of their programs as well as one of their summer camp director positions. I worked for animal rescue. So I love, and I'll talk about my pets a little bit later, but I had a chance to work in the education department as well as the behavior and training of 2 different animal rescues, which was really rewarding, but also challenging, as you can imagine. It was actually after that animal rescue work, there's some high burnout with that field. I've taken some time off, and that's how I kind of opened up opportunities for teaching quilting.
I'm imagining with the animal rescue, no matter what job we're doing, there's always details that we don't see are included in that job. And I can't imagine all those details that you had to do with that job.
Luckily, I think the good days far outnumbered the challenging days, but after a while, you do get attached to so many of the animals, and it's great when so many of them do find their forever homes. You certainly cheer. Some of those forever homes may be with me, of course.
So what exactly took you from New York to California?
I tell people it was a love-hate relationship. I was in a long-distance relationship for a year or so. So I was ready to kind of move closer to be with them. And I hated winters. I hated the snow. I hated the cold. I was just kind of cranky. I never took up winter sports. I was a summer sports girl. So there weren't many months to do that. And so I was looking for a change. I was looking for a different location. And so California was very attractive. Moved cross country back in 2010. And I have no regrets in terms of I love the weather out here. I love the quilting community. It's been a number of opportunities that have been really worked out well for me.
You're in San Jose. You're not really in Southern California. You're more in Central California. So you probably don't get as many sunny days as you hope for.
I don't know. I told people, I said, I'll never complain about California weather, especially in San Jose. We're not too far from San Francisco, so Northern California. I stopped checking the weather, quite honestly, when I moved out here, because it'd be a little bit overcast in the mornings. And usually by 10 or 11 o'clock, it would burn up. The clouds would all go away. And most days are sunny. We have a little bit of rain season right now. It's funny. I joke with my partner who's also from New York, and we say, oh, if it's just spits or light rain, it's like a weather emergency for San Jose folks. To us, this is nothing. I'll take this over some of the drizzle and some of the major storms that we would get growing up in New York. So yeah, I love it.
When my husband and I went to San Francisco for a meeting, we had to buy me a sweatshirt because I forgot how the weather changes during the day. So my mom got after me. She's like, I can't believe it. But after all these years, I still have a sweatshirt.
Yeah, they can get a little more chilly up there. They're right on the bay. So if you go out to like Alcatraz and whatnot, you definitely want to bring some layers for visiting the city, but it's wonderful.
Yeah. What else would you like to share about your family?
Well, I've shared that I have a partner. He's an electrical engineer. So a lot of the stuff, I have no clue what he's doing when he talks about his technology and all the things he's doing with his colleagues. My eyes glaze over, just like I'm sure he kind of glazes over when he hears about some of the technical details of the quilting community. My mother and my brother live in Florida. So if I need to get away, I've got another warm location I can escape to. And then, as I mentioned earlier, I have 3 studio assistants that have 4 legs. They are all dogs. 2 of them were rescued in moments of weakness at the shelter I worked at. And then because of the work I did at the shelter, I was able to gain trust of the 3rd one. She was a stray that was in our neighborhood. And it took about a week for me to gain her trust to even come up and approach me, to the point that I could actually catch her and bring her into our care. And so 3 little ones.
You say little ones, but are they small breeds or medium or large?
They're all under 25 pounds. So the newest one, she's like 14 pounds. She's the tiniest dog I've ever had. The next one is about 15 or 16 pounds. And then the biggest one is about 25, 26. So she's fairly small, medium.
And they all get along?
They do. Yeah. Especially the little one and the medium one. When we brought her in, the middle dog, Susie Q, thought we just gave her the best present ever. She loves her little sister. The 2 of them snuggle up galore. And so they get along pretty well. We walk all 3 of them. I can walk all 3 around the neighborhood without any issues. They all have their places in the world, in the studio, and they all peacefully coexist, which is nice.
Yeah. You must be great at training.
I have my moments, but yes, they're fun to train and they do help me. They're often in my photo shoots for quilts I finish. I've got them trained that they'll pose, especially some of them really enjoy posing. They're my quality control if they like the quilt or not. Sometimes they're my muse for art as well. So they're fun and they keep me entertained.
That's great. Well, when you think of future generations to come, how do you think they'll look back on your life?
That's such a big question. I was like, gosh, what do I want them to think? I'm hoping that they see me. Maybe they've taken a class with me. They've seen my art and they see that joy factor. I think that's what I'm really passionate about, is doing things that bring me joy, that create joy in the world. And so I hope that's what I'm remembered for, is that playful, that joyfulness.
And second on that, if you could talk to them, what would you like to say to the world that you would just like to give them advice on?
I would say it's kind of related, is make time for play every day. I think sometimes we get into our work or stress schedule life, and we tend to forget to be a kid, to have that fun factor, and we get very serious and everything's work. There's definitely work in my life, but if you can turn it into a game, if you could gamify it, add that joy, I think it makes our days go smoother. It makes us branch out of our comfort zone with a little bit more ease. And so I'm all about that play and have fun.
Yeah. That just reminded me about playing. I know now that I play video games a little too much because I had to go to a doctor up in Columbus and they did a thing to check my sight. I had to stare at the dot in the middle, and as lights lit up, I had to press a clicker. Even during that, I was smiling so much. Oh, this is fun, wee! And then I see the doctor, and she sees the results, and she said, "You got perfect. No one gets perfect."
See, it pays off. It trains your eyes. Again, I think there's so many wonderful benefits to play that we underestimate. I think sometimes people like poo-poo it. Oh, you're so juvenile. Well, no, I get a lot done through that play. And so I'm a big advocate for finding those joy factors.
Yeah. It is fun. And I think we learn better when it's fun.
Yes, absolutely. Nobody wants to learn or do stuff when it's torture. It's when it's fun that joy kind of opens you up and it makes you more courageous to try something new.
Yeah, it would. Well, you may have mentioned these from when you were young, but are there other crafts that you do or have done?
I'm a game to try almost anything once at least and see if I like it. I'm always eager to try something new. I would say in the past, probably 3 or 4 years, I've been crossing over more and more into the mixed media world. And when we say mixed media, it's pretty much anything is game. Especially I love watercolor. I used to kind of get a little bit stressed with watercolors. You couldn't control it, but I'm really embracing the flow of the paints and kind of working with it. I love layered collage using papers. I tend to be a lot more free with paper, especially when it comes out of the junk mail or it's something I've painted. For whatever reason, I think when we have fabric, it's so precious, something that we've been trained in the quilting world. We must use every bit and you must use it wisely. And with paper, I can take a lot more creative risks. If it doesn't work out, plan A, no worries. It came from the recycling bin. If it goes back into the recycling bin, nobody's going to be the wiser. So I find that's really helped me to explore, get messy versus being always so neat and meticulous that we often do in the quilting world. So I've really seen a shift in my fiber art. I take these little side trips to mixed media, whether it's classes, projects, whatever. I do this little side trip and then they tend to come back into my fiber art one way or the other. It's a faster way of playing with color. Often in the quilting world, you have to make an entire quilt to know were you successful with your color choices. With mixed media, I can splash and paint, I can mix all kinds of colors and get really immediate or fast feedback. And so I've seen such a skyrocket of growth and learning from the mixed media world. I do some doodling. And again, I just did a December doodle every day. I ordered some little ink swatches, samples from one of the pen companies. And there was glittery ones and ones that shimmered and changed colors. And every day I set aside a few minutes to do doodling. Usually the few minutes led to longer. And I often took inspiration from free motion quilting. So some of the motifs I would doodle. And some of my doodles, I think, will definitely make an appearance in my free motion quilting. So again, these little side trips always come back. And then the most recent, and I would say not so recent, I've been doing it since 2021, is block printing. I've been carving my own stamps, which I really enjoy doing. I love buying fabric, but there's never quite the fabric that you're looking for or you're on a search. And so through block printing, I can create my own fabric, which is really exciting and again, liberating. And so I took a block printing class in 2021. It was around December this time of year, and I was carving almost a stamp every day for the rest of that month. I did a 100-day project with the block printing and carving. And I have well over 300, I'm probably closer to 400 stamps at this point. And again, those are starting to make it back into my fiber art, which is exciting.
So do you do small sections on a fabric and then put that fabric in, or do you lay out a large piece of fabric and do a lot of different stamping?
Yes and yes. Mostly I work small and then I'll print because, the printing, sometimes there could be a misprint and things like that. I'm not a computer or a robot. And so by working small, I can either fussy cut it and piece it together or applique it. So I find that's a little bit easier for me, but I love printing. I print pages, and if I was allowed to, I probably would print up yards and yards because it's just a really meditative process to see a solid fabric transform with the designs that you've carved, you've designed, you've marked. It's a really exciting process.
And you haven't had problem with those fading or being washed out, or do you not wash these fabrics that you work on?
I think that's a question we often get when we make our own marks with paints. Oftentimes I am using them in my art quilt, so there are no plans to wash them. You could certainly, some of them, depending on the paint or the inks you're using, you can heat set them. I heat set them all for a little bit of light wash if I need to. I probably wouldn't use them in like a baby quilt that's going to have to get lots of laundering.
Good information. Thanks. How about hobbies?
Yes. I think I tend to get very focused on quilting and art, but I think it's healthy to have a well-rounded life. I think, again, a lot of what I do outside of quilting makes its way back in. So I've done years where I've really gotten into gardening and growing things, especially here in California. It's a pretty long growing season, so it was kind of exciting starting things from seeds. for the past number of years, I've been doing yoga, which I really love. My studio, I have enough floor space. I do daily yoga in here with a friend. And it's kind of fun because yoga is great on so many levels. It helps clear your brain. So I can do some really great design strategies after a yoga session because my mind's clear and blank. Because I do it in my studio, I can see my fabric stash. I can see that pile of materials over in the corner. And a lot of times things inspire. And I've created several quilts that were inspired by my yoga practice. So whether it's symbols, poses, things like that. And I think quilting, yeah, we joke, we think it's easy, but there's some physical work or stamina that's required, especially when you're working up to a deadline and you're kind of trying to crank out that quilt before a baby's born or a big deadline. And so I think yoga really helps build up your endurance. So when you're doing those marathon quilting sessions, you're a little bit well off and you don't pay the consequences for days afterwards. Other things, obviously with the dogs, I have the dog training, going for walks. I love doing walks around the neighborhood and looking for inspiration. I don't do as much gardening now, but I take inspiration from other neighbors' gardens and what they're growing and just in awe and taking pictures all the time. And for a number of years, I did comedy improv classes locally, which is super fun. We started going to shows. They were maybe 15 minutes north of where I live now. And they were just so much fun. Just like 2 hours of just stress relief, very much shows like Whose Lines Is It Anyway, if you've ever watched those shows. And so they were just so fun. And so they started making announcements at the intermission that they offered classes. I was like, oh, this could be kind of fun. I was looking at teaching and doing more lectures. And I thought that'd be a great way to build up my confidence, my public speaking. And so I took the first class just to see what it was. And the 2-hour classes flew by so fast. Comedy improv was all about working fast and purposely making mistakes. So again, that really helps. You're thinking fast under fire. What's also exciting about comedy improv, people often think comedy is stand-up comedy. And that's total opposite. You are part of a team, a troupe. And so all you have to do is bring one idea to the table or up on stage, and then know that your fellow cast members are going to have your back. And so they bring something else to offer, and you have to respond. It's probably one of the best professional and personal development opportunities I've ever done. I did it for a number of years, kept working up. I was part of the in-house troupe, so we would perform on the weekends. I did it via Zoom during the pandemic, and it's been wonderful for teaching. It's been wonderful for brainstorming ideas. So it's come in a very handy, even though I'm not actively doing it now. Those skills will stay with me for a lifetime.
Wow. It's so involved. That's great. When you were sharing about your crafts and your hobbies, you told how they influence your quilting. So is there any other way that they have influenced your quilting?
I think they often are fodder for what I create, some of the blocks or some of the quilts I've created. I think the walks with my dogs, whenever I'm struggling with an idea for design, I'll go for a walk. There's a great TED talk that I listened to where the researcher looked at 2 groups of individuals doing problem solving. Half the group was sitting down doing the problem solving, and half was walking on a treadmill just at a moderate pace. And those that were walking on a treadmill were far outperforming in terms of creative problem solving and everything else than those that were sitting down. And I see that happen so often. I'll go out for a walk and we'll just be around the corner, and all of a sudden I'll have ideas for a new quilt or a new class or whatever. And I'm rushing home, making notes to myself and eager to get back into the studio so I can execute those ideas. So I definitely see that a huge help. So I always tell people, if you're stuck for an idea, go for a walk. Even just 5 minutes, you'll be amazed at what your brain can work out for you.
Our bodies are amazing. So who introduced you to quilting?
I believe it was my aunt on my mother's side. She was a quilter. I remember being in junior high or high school. She gave me one year for either my birthday or Christmas, she gave me a bundle of fabric. She was going to teach me how to quilting. Again, I was probably in high school, so super busy schedule. Then I went off to college. And so I never had a chance to directly learn from her, but she planted those seeds very early on. I remember having those fabrics and petting them. I had my first fabric stash pretty darn early, so she got me started there, and I haven't looked back since then. It wasn't until my final year of grad school that I actually started making quilts. I had a stack of T-shirts from high school, college, camp that I was no longer wearing. And somewhere I got the idea that they could be turned into a quilt. I've never made a quilt before, but I called up my mother and I asked her to bring up our Kenmore sewing machine. It was a workhorse. So she came up to visit me, kind of gave me a crash course of how to use it. I didn't know about stabilizing the t-shirt fabrics. I didn't know about batting and binding and all of that stuff. So in a nutshell, it was a hot mess of a quilt, but I love the process. That quilt travels with me to different conferences and road trips and everything else. But pretty much as soon as I finished that first quilt, I went out and bought quilting cottons and haven't looked back since. So yeah, she definitely planted the seeds very early on.
I'm trying to picture a t-shirt quilt without stabilizer, and I cannot picture that.
I still have it. She did so many hacks. Somebody gave me an older quilt. So I attached the t-shirts to that. It was piece top, but I flipped it like a pillowcase. I tied up the centers. So I still technically have that quilt. I don't use it nearly as often, but it was heavy. I love the weight. And I've made several t-shirts quilts since, and I now know to stabilize them. So I look back at some of my earlier quilts. The seam allowances were all over the place. But again, it was about the process and how much I've grown since making that first quilt way back when.
Yeah. Whether it's a quilt that you made or maybe even a quilt someone else made, is there a favorite quilt?
That's another hard question. They're kind of like my children. It's hard to choose favorites. I usually say that whatever the most recent finish, that's my favorite because it's most salient in my mind. But there are certain quilts I think that stick with me. They've helped me with some major memorable milestones in my quilting career. And those tend to kind of be the ones I bring to trunk shows proudly and show off. They're the ones that I'm really reluctant to ever sell because they are a symbol of the kind of that growth and that journey as an artist.
What tool are you just so happy you have? When you pick it up, you're thinking, oh, I'm glad I get to use this one.
There are many tools that are out there. I don't go too gadget heavy. I get tools that can be a multifunctional one. I will say I love my sewing machine. I've gone through a number of sewing machines, and I'm currently sewing on a Juki TL 2010. That's a straight stitch machine. So it's as simple as you can get. There's no decorative stitches. There's no computerized, but it's a real workhorse and it gets the job done. So I've had no issues with that machine. I pet it. I say, I love you. It's a great machine. I highly recommend it for anybody that just wants to do piecing, top stitch applique, or quilting. I love blue painter's tape. I find that a really practical tool in so many different ways, from no mark quilting to marking your different units. So blue painter's tape. But I think my most recent and favorite tool is dice. And I know that's not a typical one, and it goes back to my childhood of playing games. But ever since 2020 and maybe even earlier, I've been using dice as part of my design process. I've created game plans using dice for 100-day projects. So basically every night I go into my studio, I roll the dice to get my daily assignment, and that's what I create. And so I love the dice because I don't have to overthink, what am I going to create today? What am I going to do today? I roll and I respond. So it's a really liberating tool. It's a playful approach. Again, if you're going to do a 100-day project, that's 100 days of creating in a row. And so that can be kind of daunting. And so the dice is kind of gamifies it. It gives you opportunities. And it's really stretched me out of my comfort zone as I try to mash together different assignments that are rolled by the dice. It's led to a lot of growth, a lot of development in a fun, playful way. So dice is my current one. I have all kinds of dice. I have the standard 6-sided ones, but people are always giving me more dice in different colors, different shapes, different configurations. So pretty much anything can be solved with dice is my decision.
I'm curious, when you're going through certain stages in your process, how do you go about assigning a number to what you're going to do?
Oh, so on my website, I have a whole gallery called Design by Dice, and that's where I share a lot of my projects that use dice. So I've used it from everything from tackling my UFOs. So I've done like UFO challenges where I will pick 6 or more UFOs. I'll give them each a number. And every day I will roll the dice and I'm going to work on it for at least 15 minutes. Again, it gets me into my studio in a playful way. I've used it for learning more about color theory or the design elements and design principles. I've used it during the pandemic where museums, quilt shows, galleries were all closed, and those are big sources of inspiration for me. So I had to look within my limited bubble. And so I rolled the dice to find different sources of inspiration. Maybe it was a photo I'd taken. Maybe it was something in my day or the world's history or news that helped me kind of see, hey, I don't need to always go to these places to get inspiration. It truly is all around me if I choose to open up my eyes. What else I used it for? Block printing. When I did my block printing 100 days, I rolled the dice to determine a starting shape. So am I going to carve a square stamp, a circle? Again, a lot of quilterly shapes. And then I rolled another dice. What am I going to put inside that shape? So am I going to fill it with text, lines, nature? And so again, all I had to do was roll and respond. And I had my daily assignment.
Sounds great that you can put fun into quilting.
There's no point otherwise. If it's not fun, what's the point? We had a great elementary gym teacher growing up. And in the gym, he had a giant banner. If you had fun, you won. And I think that mantra stayed with me all through my life is that, if you can't find the fun, then what's the point?
That gym teacher must have been a good one to have.
Yes, he was wonderful.
Do you like each step of the quilting process, or do you like one particular step the most?
I do enjoy all steps of it. I think there are certain parts that I love, and it depends on what my brain capacity is that day. I think we all have different functionalities. And there are days that I just enjoy the meditativeness of just free motion quilting and doing the same thing over and over, or binding. Again, that can be a really easy, meditative, mindless project. There are other days that I have energy, excitement, enthusiasm. And those are the days I try to channel towards designing. What colors do I want to pull? What shapes, what patterns, etc. I really do enjoy the design process. I really enjoy the meditativeness of the free motion quilting and add that texture to it. Yeah, I think I enjoy most steps of it.
Can you share your worst quilting experience?
It's funny. This question came up recently at a holiday party I was at, and they asked us our horror stories from the quilting studio. And at first I drew a complete blank. I was like, that never happens to me. And then as other people started to share their horror stories, all of a sudden these memories started coming out of the woodwork. It's like, oh yeah, that's happened to me. Oh yeah, I feel. And so I think we block some of those painful memories. I think the one for me is I do a lot of quilt challenges. And so I would say that many of the challenges are anywhere from a month to 6 months that you have to work on it. This was a year-round challenge. So every month we had the month to reinterpret or remake a traditional quilt block in a modern way. And so these were all these little mini challenges, 12 months of them, so 12 blocks. Those are fun and easy. And as you can imagine, after the 12th month, they gave us 2 or 3 months to put them all together into a finished quilt for judging and awards and all that stuff. And I should say this challenge was Everything Old is New Again challenge. It was a partnership between a magazine company, Michael Miller Fabrics, and somebody else. So it was kind of a lot of participants around the country and probably the world participating. So after 2 months, we had some time to put them all together into a finished quilted and bound quilt. And I actually finished mine several days early, which is very rare for me. I am queen of the 11th hour. And so I got it done. We had to do a blog post and upload our pictures so people could do voting. And I was so proud of it. And then I get a message from one of my friends and she goes, Mel, I don't know how to tell you this, but I think your quilts are too big. I was like, what? She goes, yeah, the rules say it could be no bigger than 60 inches by 60 inches. Well, I went overboard. I made my quilt 72 by 72. I wanted lots of negative space to show off my quilting. Somewhere I'm sure I read those rules and those measurements. I forgot them when I was designing that final phase. And yeah, I disqualified myself. After working on this thing for 14, 15 months, it was a really painful lesson. Oh, my stomach just was flipping. It just really upset for days. I emailed the organizers, told them about my mistakes, said I withdraw from the competition. I was really pretty upset by it. But, it was a lesson learned, painfully, albeit. But luckily, that quilt did go on to get some ribbons at other shows. It got juried into Houston Quilt Festival and other honors in local and national competitions. But it was not eligible for that competition that I was first making it for. So that was a really painful lesson. I share that as part of my Challenge Yourself lecture, where I talk about quilt challenges and tips and tricks. So hopefully others can avoid making that painful mistake as I did. But I survived. And I think that's so important. When we make mistakes, there's a great artist I follow, Carolyn Dubie, in the mixed media world, and she calls it an oops moment. And it's an outstanding opportunity presenting itself. And again, a lot of the mistakes, it's painful in the moment, but if we persevere, if we go with plan B or C or whatever 26 letters in the alphabet, usually those outcomes, if you persevere, they tend to be some of my favorite quilts because of those pain points, if you will.
Yeah, it does seem like just about all of the people that have answered this question tell whatever that mistake was, how it turned out to be a wonderful thing. Now, we all have 24 hours in our day, and we could do anything we want with them. So why have you chosen to continue quilting when you could do anything else?
Quilting is such a joy for me. I love that it uses my hands to create. It uses my many senses. It uses my brain to kind of problem solve and come up with designs. It uses my heart because I'm often telling a story or I'm sharing something of myself in that piece. I love the tactile nature. There are things that you can do with fabric that you can't necessarily do with a piece of paper, such as cuddling with it, feeling it, touching it, that emotional attachment that you get to fabric. And I really love that, how you can manipulate it into a variety of ways, sometimes good, sometimes bad. So I really enjoy that tactile nature. I love the color that fabric offers. I love the pattern, the texture. Those are all just really enjoyable parts of the process. But yeah, I think it comes to problem solving. It keeps my brain pretty agile and it gives me a voice. It's an opportunity to tell my story, to say something, to add joy to the world. So it does a lot for me. And that's why I keep coming back to it over and over.
Have you had thoughts at times of checking out or making a change, but it was just so strong you decided, no, I'm going to stay quilting?
Absolutely. Almost every year, I do these really intense 100-day challenges or really intense, like 1 week challenges. And then there's a little bit of a fatigue after it's all done and over. We just finished Carve December, where I was carving every day. And it's kind of like a little moratorium when it's all over. It's like, now what? And so I tell people sometimes I do lose my sojo, my mojo or sojo. And I'm okay with that. At first, I used to panic, like, oh gosh, I don't feel like sewing today. But there's so many other ways that I stay creative. I still play. So while I may not be touching my sewing machine every day, I'm taking pictures. I'm observing the world around me. I'm reading books. I'm looking at social media, getting in little inspiration. So I'm constantly planting seeds. And so when that inspiration strikes again, I've got lots of ideas, lots of energy. I've been told one of the pieces of advice, if you lose your soja, it's to clean your studio. And that's worked really well, that I start going through every square inch and kind of work in the clockwise format and going through everything. And it's such a great exercise because you get reacquainted with your fabric, your tools, things that you've kind of squirreled away and forgotten about. It's like, oh, I could do this. And you start seeing combinations. And so I usually don't actually finish cleaning the studio. I get about halfway across to my fabric stash and I'm ready to get back into sewing. So it's kind of one of my go-tos. If I lose sojo, I give it a week or two, and then I start cleaning and tidying up, and it's worked every time.
And we're not even to the tip yet.
Sorry.
No, I'm teasing. I'm teasing because that was such a wonderful tip. Who do you make your quilts for?
I started off as a quilter, often making quilts. My first maybe 10 quilts or so were for family and friends who were hitting major milestones. So they were getting married, they were having a baby, there was their birthday, et cetera, depending on what diameter circle you were in with me. So probably the first 50 quilts were all for family and friends. And I'm not saying they were stellar quilts, but I loved them. It was a labor of love and I proudly gave it to them. Now I'm kind of horrified. I'm like, okay, if you ever give them back, I'm recalling some of my earlier quilts. I didn't have the tools. I didn't know what I know now. And so I try to replace some of those for some of the earlier quilts. So my mom's gotten probably 3 or 4 quilts, at least from me, because she was one of the first recipients. Now I would say I make quilts that I enjoy doing. So I often make them for art calls or quilt challenges that kind of ignite my imagination. But I don't necessarily make them with the intent of selling or giving them away. Especially as a teacher, I often need those for teaching samples, et cetera. And so I make what brings me joy. If it resonates with other people, yay, that's awesome. And I realize that not every quilt that I make is going to hit all people, and that's okay. But it's kind of what excites me, what gets me into the studio, what topics kind of spark something within me that I want to explore through my fiber art.
Do you happen to be working on something right now that you're allowed to share?
We just finished Carve December. So if you're not familiar, Carve December happens every December. It's hosted by artist Julie Fay-Fan Balzer Designs. And basically we carve daily for 31 days during what is usually a very busy time with holidays, travel, everything else. And so I just finished 31 days of carving daily. Julie provides 31 prompt words that you can or don't have to use. And I enjoy those prompt words because some of them stumped me at first. I'm like, what the heck am I going to carve for? Like one was like kingdom. I'm like, what am I going to create for kingdom? Or one was, I think, wash. I'm like, what am I going to create for wash? And a lot of times it takes me on this rabbit hole of new inspiration. And again, I try to carve something that I'm likely to use in my art. I've gotten some great ideas. I'm like, that'd be fun. But yeah, I'm probably not likely to use that in my art. So I'd rather do something that's practical or at least creative based. So I am starting this Sunday is Project Quilting. That's a 1-week challenges that I've been participating in for the past 8 or 9 years now. It's hosted by Persimmon Dreams, a blogger. And so she is a big fan of Project Runway. And so they're kind of inspired by Project Runway, where there's a challenge theme. You have 1 week to start and finish a quilt. Usually there aren't size restraints. So a lot of mine are at quarter size or smaller. I've had a few bigger ones. And so I'm getting ready for that to kick off on Sunday. And again, I'm really excited to get a week on of really intense creating. And then we have a week off. And that always helps me get my sojo back, but also connect with other artists around the world that are participating in these fast and furious 1-week challenges.
Do you know how many countries?
I know they've consistently been getting over 200 finishes per week, which is, wow. When I first started, I don't know how many people finished a quilt in 1 week, but it just keeps growing year after year. So it's really exciting because, again, the challenge themes, you never know what's going to come until it's announced Sunday, my morning. You have 1 week. Well, some people finish it that first day. I don't think that's ever happened to me. I'm usually doing an all-nighter Saturday night trying to finish up my project. Once in a while, I squeak it out a little earlier. But a number of those quilts I've been able to enter into art exhibits. In fact, one I'll be dropping off on Sunday was a Project Quilting challenge. So it's a great way to start off the year on a really creative note.
Nice. And like you said, it is good to get to meet all these other quilters.
It's so much fun because on Sunday, everybody uploads their pictures. And it's like, how did they all interpret the challenge theme? It's open to all skill levels. There are a number of beginners that they're trying it. They're being really courageous, and I commend them for that. There are some that are pretty seasoned professionals that are doing it as well. There's a few people, I swear, they don't sleep, eat, or do anything because they are cranking out like almost queen size quilts in a 1 week. I'm not able to manage that, but I give compliments to whoever can do that within a week's time frame.
Wow. What quilting tip do you like to share?
We talked about a little bit earlier, play. I think that's going to make the journey so much more fun. When you have those mistakes, that playfulness is going to help you be curious, inquisitive. Okay, what can I do next? And I think the other one is to take classes and workshops. In some ways, I wish I took in classes earlier in my quilting career, because when I finally took my first quilting workshop and I moved to California, not that I was doing everything wrong, but there were more efficient ways of doing things and getting actually better results. So I'm a huge fan of taking classes and workshops. I was very active with my local quilt guilds. And so we had monthly speakers that offered workshops, and I took a lot of them over the years. And I'm not saying that all the artists' designs resonate with me, but I always picked up something, a tip or tool, a trick, something from each and every visiting artist that I could kind of add to my own quilter's toolkit. So I'm a huge fan of whenever you have a chance to take a class, go to a lecture, keep an open mind, and just take as much as you can in terms of inspiration to bring your own voice to fruition.
That's good advice. Thanks. Now, I always assume that people start their quilting as a hobby, and yours turned into a business. How did that happen?
I would say reluctantly at first. For a number of years, my mother, my brother would encourage me, oh, you should teach classes, you should sell your quilts. And I was really reluctant because for me, quilting for a number of years was my source of stress relief. It was my outlet to kind of channel everything from my usual day job. And so when they kept nudging me, I was like, no, I don't want to turn that into a business and have that extra stress or pressure. I just left the animal shelter work and took some break. And it was after that that I got 2 opportunities that kind of just happened to happen around the same time. One was my own Quilt Guild asked me to lead a teaching demo for fellow members. And not only did it sell out, but it was such a positive experience teaching and leading them through this exercise. I think the workshop was on a Wednesday. The following Monday was our guild meeting where they do show and tell. About 20 members got up on stage, showed off their finished project. So I was a real proud teacher and just saw how that sparked their imagination. And around that same time, I got an email from a guild in Las Vegas. They'd gotten my name. They'd been following me on my blog and they were looking for speakers. And they said, hey, would you be willing to come and do a lecture for us? And so it was kind of the stars were aligned. And I was like, okay, this is my sign. Let's try it. Let's see where this goes. And I haven't looked back since then.
It's great to follow those opportunities that come along, and it does lead us.
It's been amazing because it feels like all of my previous work. So all the work in higher education, I often did programming, all the work with animal shelters. I'm not saying quilters are like dogs or cats, but I can use the same skill set to break down some really complex techniques or ideas into really manageable chunks that people aren't feeling frustrated. I can recognize the signs of frustration. And so it just feels like all of my life experiences have really kind of set me up for a really productive and positive experience teaching.
Yeah, I was thinking about that as you were speaking earlier and thought, boy, you can see how this all shaped what she's doing now. Share the name of your business and tell how you came up with the name.
I kept it simple. I went with Mel Beach Quilts. I think it was advice that people, when they start looking for you as a teacher, they're going to look you up by your name. I do have a blog that I started before I was even thinking about teaching, and it's called Peace, Love, and Happiness, but it's PIECE. Peace, Love, and Happiness, the symbols have been my personal mantra probably since junior high. I used to write on all my letters, all my backpacks, all this stuff. And so when I was coming up with a blog post, I went with Peace, Love, and Happiness, kind of the pun. But for my website, for my social media, everything else, I go by Mel Beach Quilt so people can find me pretty readily.
Yeah, we need simple at times.
Yes. And there's cute names. Even I struggle, but I know the person's name. And again, as an artist, be proud of your name and that connection so you can build up that audience.
How long have you been doing this?
I believe it was 2016 is when I first took that leap into teaching full time. And I expected to go slow. Here in California, especially Northern California, there are a number of guilds really locally, which is wonderful. We also have a program called Northern California Quilt Council. What they do is they bring together guild reps, they bring together teachers, judges, shows, all under one roof. And they do a program twice a year called Meet the Teachers. And so once I kind of decided this was my trajectory, I'd give it a try, I was able to get myself on that list to present my wares. Those Meet the Teacher programs are pretty intense. You get up on stage, you have 3 minutes, exactly 3 minutes to talk. You get your little shtick, share your quilt, share your workshops and lectures. And if you go over, they will have a hook and they will actually tell you your time's up and take away the microphone. I think I talked so fast that I never even came close to 3 minutes. But I was amazed. A number of guilds liked what they saw. They came up to me during the break. They were looking for dates and contracts. And I got a number of teaching invites in that first year. And in the quilting world, word spread. So when they enjoy your lectures, when they enjoy your workshops, they tell their friends. Oftentimes in certain communities like Sacramento, I noticed. I went one time for a guild lecture. Well, they have like 5 or 6 guilds in that area, and their members often join multiple guilds. So they saw me in this one guild. Within about a month, I got invited to the other 4 or 5 guilds really quickly. So it kind of grew from there. With the pandemic, I was able to go more national and international because of Zoom. We didn't have those restrictions of travel costs. I keep telling people, so many of my careers, I felt like I was swimming against the stream. I was fighting bureaucracy. I was fighting management. I was fighting whatever. Or frustrated, I would say. And here, I just feel like the stars are aligned. I'm finally going with the stream, with the current, and things just keep kind of, I don't say they just fall in my lap. I'm working hard behind the scenes to make them and create those connections, but it's nice to see those efforts rewarded in a really positive way.
Yeah. I'm wondering, you've kept doing Zoom?
I do. I like it. I tend to find that with Zoom programs, folks are less stressed out, especially like a free motion quilting class, because They're not comparing themselves to their table mates and seeing how perfect their stitches are versus theirs. They're working on their primary sewing machine rather than the classroom machine that may or may not be as familiar to them or have all the features that they're accustomed to. They can spread out in their own space. They have access. They don't have to worry about packing up their whole studio and forgetting something. So I really enjoy the opportunities that come with teaching via Zoom. I find I'm a better teacher because I can use the technology really effectively. It removes a lot of barriers for folks that were caretakers or various mobility issues. It takes away a lot of those barriers, and I really enjoy it. I do limited in person here and there, but it's usually for multi-day, like a quilt show or events.
And I'm curious in that you have several students. Are you able to, through Zoom, look at one student and help them here and then another student help them there?
Yes, it definitely takes a shifting of the process. And so as a teacher, when I was teaching in person, I was very actively circulating around the classroom, checking with every student. And so very early into pivoting to Zoom teaching, I really had to kind of do my introduction to let people know that, hey, there's some ownership on you to speak up when you need something from me. I'm here. I do cap my classes to 20 or 22 people so I can see everybody on the screen. And I give them a number of ways they can connect with me. And I like it because, especially with Zoom, we have the chat. And I know so many beginners, there's so many acronyms and so many things we talk about in the quilting world. And beginners can be reluctant to ask a question. But with Zoom, you can use the chat to send a private message. And I always tell people that's a great way. I'm not going to out you. I'm not going to be like, oh my gosh, Paula's asked me for the 10th time to do the same demonstration. I can be a lot more discreet and just say, hey, I've been asked to do the demonstration again. If that relates to you, watch. And if not, keep working on your project. I find it's a much more welcoming, supportive, safe environment, especially for more beginner-friendly quilters. And so I try to prioritize and make sure everybody gets what they need. Again, some of the teaching demos I pre-record so I can play them over and over. So if it doesn't click the first time, I can play it over and over. I don't lose my voice. So I'm happy to do that. And I think it accommodates so many different learning styles that everybody has a great view. They can see the information. They have the handouts. And so I find it works really well.
Nice. You said that one group called and asked you to give a lecture. You hadn't given a lecture before. So what was your thought process? Were you scared or excited or what?
I was honored. And then I was like, what did I just get myself into? Because I had no lecture planned. So I kind of looked at my body of work and what could I tell? And I didn't want to just do a generic chunk show. I wanted to kind of tell a story. And so I chose to focus on my quilt challenges I've been doing. And so it's pretty much the same lecture I'm still giving this day. I've certainly updated with a little bit more information, different quilts. And I remember for that first chunk show, they often recommend that you have about 20 quilts that you bring with you to kind of show as part of the chunk show portion. I had to borrow back a few of my quilts because I did not have all those quilts in my power that were part of quilt challenges. Now I laugh at it because almost every lecture I do, I have to edit out some old ones to put in some newer ones. And there's certain quilts that stay in. They've been there since the beginning because they are those milestones, those precious quilts that kind of taught me a lot in the quilt challenge world. But I was definitely nervous. I wasn't sure. I kind of tried to rehearse it, practice it, but it was really well received. It was a huge honor. I think either by the end of that visit or soon thereafter, they invited me back again for a workshop. So I took that as high praise. I passed the test and I've been back at least twice since then. So again, a huge honor. I go with an open mind. I ask the questions. I prepare as much as I can. But again, that comedy improv training, not much phases me these days.
Well, that would be really nice.
Not much, but there are a few things. But yes, I mean, with teaching, you never know what to expect, especially in person. There were days that I showed up and we were teaching in a bowling alley. Very resourceful, kind of a fun environment, but again, not a traditional, a church or school that you would often be teaching in. I've taught in animal shelters, which was really interesting. It was actually Southern California and they were having some wildfires. And so they had a whole bunch of kennels in the back of the classroom. It was like a community space that the guilds used. And they said, listen, if things go south, we may have to evacuate you so we can take in evacuated pets and whatnot. So luckily that didn't happen. So you just never know. I've showed up to teach for a workshop We got all set up. I was just doing my intro bit, and another party showed up, and they were all crying and sobbing, and we couldn't figure out what was going on. The venue that we were at was double booked with a memorial service. And so, again, what do you do? Obviously, they need their time to grieve. And so we quietly packed up, got out of their way, and went to the program chair. Okay, what's next? And they called around, and we moved over to one of the local quilt shops. They let us set up and teach. And so we started all over again. And it was interesting because it was my mandala class, and that's an exercise in Zen and meditation. And so, okay, we're going to practice what I preach. And so get yourself situated and let's start over. And it was a great workshop.
They got more experience in that class than they would have otherwise.
Unexpected, but yes, hopefully it teaches them that, nothing should faze us.
Please tell me about the Emerald Gardens quilt that you made.
Yes. When you ask me about some of my favorite quilts, that's one of the ones that comes to mind in terms of one of my current favorites. 2023, I did a series of block printed and stitched quilts, again, using my block prints I've been carving. And so it was getting close to, I was a president of Studio Art Quilt Associates. It's a global organization dedicated to the art quilt. We do an annual benefit auction every September, early October sometimes. Members donate 12 by 12 art quilts, and people bid on them up to $1,000 for a 12 by 12 quilt. Of course, as president, it's up to me to lead by example. And so I had this idea to try making a block printed quilt using some of my blocks. And I was playing with a material called Evelon. I know a lot of folks have never heard of Evelon. It's a non-woven fiber. It's super soft like flannel, but it's paper thin. So it's kind of an interesting properties, and it takes paint up beautifully. So I faux dyed it. And because I wasn't quite sure where this quilt was going, I had a little insurance. I made 3 of them. So I painted 3 different squares of fabric. I block printed 3 somewhat similar but different designs, not sure. And so basically, once I had the 3 somewhat partially done, it's okay, I'll start stitching it. So the first one went to the benefit auction, where it actually sold for $1,000. I was hugely honored to have one of my pieces, especially small. So the second piece in that series was Emerald Gardens. And again, it's a similar design, but green and lots of floral elements into it. And so last year, I entered it into Visions 2024. It's a show, biannual exhibition hosted by the San Diego Visions Museum of Textile Art, VOMTA. I think I applied once before and didn't get any of my pieces in, but it's a pretty well-respected and very prestigious venue. Whenever I'm in San Diego, I always go and see what's on display at Visions. And it was a huge pinch me moment when a month or 2 later, I got an email saying, congratulations, your piece has been accepted. And it wasn't the one I originally intended. I had some other pieces I was hoping, but I was like, well, for the entry fee, you get to submit 3 pieces. So I might as well increase my chances. So I was really honored that Emerald Gardens was juried into this show. It was a very prestigious juror, so that was a huge honor. And then another month or 2 later, I got an email saying, congratulations, Mel, your piece, because you're a teacher, you've been chosen for the Quilt Japan Award, which means they team up with Quilt Nihon and the Japanese Handy Quilters Association, and they're going to be paying me to fly and travel to Japan to teach a workshop for a Japanese quilter. So again, it's one of the prestigious awards. So it was like, okay, that's the sweeten the deal. It's already a pinch me moment just to get in. And now I'm getting one of the major awards. And then to sweeten the deal even more, in October was the opening reception weekend. And I went, and when we first arrived, I had a red dot next to my piece. That means your piece is sold. And I found out that evening that one of the board members purchased it to donate to the collection of the museum. They don't have a very big collection. They usually have traveling exhibits that come. And so to be part of their permanent collection was just amazing a journey. So that quilt is very near and dear to me. I'm glad it's in an amazing new home where I'm sure it will be appreciated.
Well, it's beautiful. And not only is it 12 inches by 12 inches, it's very, very detailed, and you scallop the edges.
I did. It was such a labor of love. Again, it's so exciting, that whole series of quilts. And I made several of them in a grid format and several in a mandala afterwards. They start off as pure white Evelon. So everything you see in that quilt is done by me. I did the faux dyeing with paint. I did the block printing. I did lots of stitching, both by machine quilting as well as by lots of hand embroidery. And then, yes, there's scalloped edges, but I do my scalloped edges a little bit differently. So it holds up and they're not flopping and they're not a traditional binding that you might see on a bigger quilt.
When I think of our quilt batting, I think of it as thicker, or do you use something thinner for that?
I generally use Quilter stream for most of my batting, but for that, because of those scalloped edges, I didn't want them flopping in the wind, especially if they're going to be hung up in a wall. So I put some kind of heavy duty Pellon stabilizer, and I can't remember the exact weight. I know I have it listed in my blogs. So I try to share in my blogs a lot of my materials, a lot of my processes. One, to share with other people as a teacher, but more importantly for me, so when I would go to try that again, I can have my notes pretty well easily accessible. That helps. I had the Evelyn and the batting only for doing the quilting and the hand embroidery. And then I add the other layers to finish it up and have it ready for hanging in the show.
Wow, that's a lot of work.
People always ask me how long I was doing these quilts, and it was about 10 to 14 days start to finish, truly. And again, I did kind of batches. I did the one afternoon of faux dyeing several squares. Then I did the block printing kind of all in one session. So I could kind of batch it, and then actually doing the quilting and to finish was about 10 to 14 days. Again, it's fairly small, 12 inches. There's only so much you can do with it, but it was a real joy of love.
Mel, how did you come up with the idea to make this quilt?
With that benefit auction that we do every year, for me, it's a chance to play with something new, a new idea. So I've been doing all these block prints that I was carving, and so I wondered if I could incorporate them into pieces. I'd taken some workshops on learning how to use Evelyn in different ways that you could manipulate it and paint it. And so it was an exercise in play. Curiosity, let's try it. And that's why I kind of had a little insurance by making at least starting 3 different pieces. If one didn't quite turn out, I had a plan B. And if that didn't work out, I had a plan C. And if I had to, I could always faux dye more pretty easily.
You did make that specifically for a show?
No, actually, I just made it as one of the offshoots for that benefit auction. And so since I had the 2 backup ones, I kind of just finished them up, and I learned so much from the first piece. So each piece I kind of changed up. The first piece, because it was a deadline, lots of free motion quilting, not so much hand embroidery, but each subsequent piece, it kind of shifted more and more hand embroidery, less and less free motion quilting, more bling with sequins. Again, I try not to have too many pieces working at once. So I would start to finish one process, do a blog post, and then say, okay, what way I want to do differently with this next piece. And it was, again, working on it every day a little bit. I didn't have to have everything planned out for the quilting, but day by day, things would start to tell me what's next. I would just make a decision, go with it, and then go from there.
And from that, am I hearing that people that follow you and read your blog, they can see how you're growing and changing?
I think so. I've had a few people go way back to the very beginning before I was teaching. You'll see all kinds of stuff. I think I started blogging 2011, maybe. And so you'll see really early stuff when I was just taking classes and very much consider myself still a fairly newbie quilter, even though I've been quilting for a number of years. And I always tell people my little secret, the more pictures that are in a blog post usually indicates it's the bigger struggle for me. When a quilt is easy, it's mindless, I tend to be in the zone and I forget to stop and pause and take pictures. When I'm frustrated, that's when I take lots of pauses. I step back, I take a picture to get that perspective to see what's working, what's not working, and problem solve from there. And so if you go to a blog post and it's got a lot of pictures, a lot of that was a dead end, that was a wrong decision, it's usually because it was a piece that really made me think and really problem solve a lot.
That's good to know as we look through your blog. When you arrived at the museum and saw that dot, it wasn't like you got a phone call ahead of time. You found out you got the award right then. And your reaction was?
We were the first group to arrive. So they do a members only opening reception. I think it was for board members and maybe members of the museum, plus the artists were invited. They just finished mounting the show. They had all the signage up. So we were the first group to really see it. And so when I saw that red dot, they didn't have a chance. I think it was purchased just earlier that day when they were finishing up the installation. So I saw that red dot, and you know what that red dot means. I was like, oh my gosh. And so I was able to ask the executive director, I said, can I learn more about who purchased it? And she goes, oh, yeah. And she told me the story. And luckily the board member was there on site. She was at the reception. So I was able to go up to her and talk to her. And she shared, she goes, yeah, I purchased it with the intent of donating it back to the museum's collection. So that was a huge honor.
Share with us how exciting and your experience was when you got to be on TV.
Ah, it's a huge honor. I share that when I was back in New York, the way I learned a lot of quilting was by watching Alex Anderson when she was host of Simply Quilts. And so I would wake up early, watch the show, see all the different artists that she would feature, all the tips and tricks. So I learned a lot by watching Alex Anderson. Years later, when I was invited, when I got the email to be a guest on the quilt show, it was like another pinch me moment. I kept thinking, I was like, is somebody playing a prank on me? Are they just scamming me? And so not until I actually went to Ricky Tim's studio in La Vida, that's where they were doing this round of taping because they were doing the Quilter's Legend of the Year. And so not until I walked in and I saw Justin, who's one of the producers, and he's like, hi, Mel, we're expecting you. And I was like, okay, now I know this is real. Nobody's pulling my leg. The TQS team, the Quilt Show team, they are true professionals. They are a well-oiled machine. Their executive producer, Shelly, she is so wonderful. It's about a week or two, maybe longer, maybe it's a month or so before the taping. She connects with you over the phone and she asks you all kinds of questions. And she is amazing at crafting a story that's unique to you. She asked all kinds of questions like, what does that have to do? And it was because she was trying to figure out what's unique about me and my quilting journey that would really appeal to TQS members. We kind of together brainstorm what techniques could I demonstrate in a small chunk of time. It's not like I have 6 hours to teach a class. And so it was a real pinch me moment again to have Alex picking up tips and tricks from me doing improv piecing at the time, or Ricky kind of chiming in. So it was a wonderful experience. I would say the taping, because they are so well-oiled machine, it's a complete blur. It goes start to finish. Very rarely is there a second take. It just goes and you just roll with it. And the crew's top notch. And so it's like, what did I say? Did I embarrass myself? What did I do? And so it's always kind of a nerve-wracking when the show airs. It's like, okay, I have to quickly watch to make sure what I did. And they do a beautiful job of really showcasing the quilts and the artists behind them. So it's been an honor. I did that one in La Vida. 2021, California was still shut down. So they did a very scaled back taping up in Livermore. Alex lives about 30 minutes north of me. So she's a short drive away. So they rented an Airbnb and they had a very scaled down crew. Ricky was able to come because, again, so much was shut down still. So we did taping. I had to wear a clear mask. It kept fogging up. It was some challenges. I did the design by dice with Alex. We had about 5 minutes to roll the dice and create something fast on the fly. So no pressure there. And then this most recent year, they often will bring like 10 or so artists and they do a week of taping. And one of the artists got very sick. And so they did some scrambling. And because they were, again, here in the Bay Area, there are many artists and teachers that are here. So they reached out to 4 of us and we did the Best of the Bay, basically, episode. So we had about 2 days to prepare. So once we said yes, I think I got a call that night from Shelly. And I think she only was willing to work with folks that had previously been on, so they didn't have to train up. So we were all pretty experienced. And we had about 2 days to get our segments ready, show up. And it was a fun experience.
So you didn't apply to be on it. They reached out to you?
Yeah. And actually, I tell people take classes and workshops. One of the visiting artists is Katie Fowler. She came to our guild. I wasn't originally signed up for a workshop, but her lecture just dazzled me. It was all about mark making and painting and all the stuff that I had never really done before. And I was like, I think I got to get in this workshop. And they had some openings, thankfully. And so I signed up for that workshop and I connected with her. I loved her teaching. She was all about play as well, really nice connections. And she got to know me during dinner and some other things. We'd take the teachers often out and host them. And she called to the Quilt Show team and said, are you familiar with Mel Beach? You may want to invite her. And soon enough, they did reach out to me. So it's very much who you know, and those networks and connections are just so valuable. You never know by saying yes what that may lead to.
Yeah. Isn't it exciting? It all seems so surreal, and yet it's fun.
Yeah.
Mel, I was looking at your website, and you have so many honors. You've done so much. That is great to look at. And I think we need to go to your website just to see all that you have done.
Thank you. When you're having fun, it makes it easy to keep putting yourself out there. And those 100-day projects, doing a little bit each day adds up to finished quilts, adds up to a body of work that I can enter confidently, get out there. And so it's been a wonderful roller coaster of seeing how far I've come, how much I've grown, many influences on my quilting journey. I try not to compare myself to other quilters. Instead, I look at where was I 5 years, 10 years ago, and celebrate the heck out of those progress. I think we tend to be perfectionists. We want immediate results. And it's that day in, day out kind of joy, play, building up your voice. And so it's kind of exciting when things start to take off and I have opportunities to share them with a broader community. So thank you.
Oh, you're so welcome. That was great to see. Is there anything else that you would like to share?
I would say I am really passionate about teaching and more importantly, not just important knowledge, but inspiring those that are in my classes, my lectures to have their own voice. And so I just plant seeds, just like it's been done for me. I plant seeds, I teach them techniques, and I really encourage folks to kind of go where their voice takes them. And it's really exciting to see something that I have done that has inspired other artists. And so I really enjoy that and find it very rewarding personally as well. And so when they send me pictures like, here's my finished quilt or here's a ribbon next to it, it's just a very pride-filled moment that I was able to be part of their journey and inspire them along their way.
That's great. I think as teachers, we really do love to see what the students do.
I learn as much from them as I think they learn from me. There's little things or little fabric combinations like, I never thought about that. And I will file it away. And on future challenges, there may be times that students influence some of my work or a motif that they're doing. Oftentimes it might have been a mistake. Oops, I meant to make a mistake. I love it. And that becomes part of my quilting repertoire as well.
Well, Mel, could you share your website so that we can come find you?
Yes, it makes it easy again. It's melbeachquilts.com. So just my first and last name followed by quilts. And then from there, you can get to my social media. You can get to my blog, my galleries, including that Design by Dice. What's fun about that Design by Dice, not only do I have the information about each of my game plans, but you can actually download them. So if you want to see how I've been using dice, you can download them. If you like them, use them. If you don't, you can change them up to make it work for you. So it's a rabbit hole of information and quilts.
Oh, that's wonderful. Mel, thanks again so much for joining us on A Quilter's Life. I just love hearing your story.
Thank you, Paula. This has been a real treasure for me to be able to chat, kind of reflect on my quilting journey and share it with both you and your audience. So thank you for this lovely afternoon.
Well, thanks again. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
You can find more stories on aquilterslife.com or subscribe on your favorite podcast player so each episode will be downloaded automatically. Also, I want to hear about you and your wonderful quilts. Please contact me, Paula Chamberlain, through the website to set up an interview. And as always, thanks for listening.